Hello, everyone. This is Dr. Zina Suissa. I'm president of Residence and Executive and Team Coaching. We provide coaching and training for corporate and individuals. I have with me John Livesay, an amazing man who I learned so much, as I just said to John, a very compelling man. And with your permission, John, I'd like to talk a little bit about you.
Please, thank you.
I have to read because you know your life better than I do. John Livesay is known as the pitch whisperer. He helps people become magnetic storytellers with his ability to help them with irresistible offers to their clients. As a keynote speaker, he has captivated audiences in settings ranging from Gensler's top management to Coca-Cola's CMO Summit. He's the author, everybody buy the book, The Successful Pitch, Conversations in Going from Invisible to Investable, and host of the Successful Pitch podcast, which is heard in over 60 countries. He's appeared on TV, CBS, Fox, ABC, as the expert on how to ask for what you want and get a yes. I love that. I have heard John speak, and from me to you, John, I know what makes you, you. Your charisma, your charm, your knowledge. More so, your empathy. You're helping people by walking in their shoes. During a 20-year career in media sales with Condé Nast, he worked across all 22 brands, in their corporate division, and he was the recipient of the Salesperson of the Year award. I am delighted to have him with me. A man who states, no one is coming to rescue you. You have to be the lifeguard of your own life. And I'm going to go on just a little bit more. For you, from me to you, John, you are compelling. You embody an experience in life that you, and I want everybody to watch the YouTube because he has over 1 million viewers, people. This is amazing. You demonstrate a man who's invincible. You show in a time of disruption that you will not lose your identity. You will make decisions and you will not allow fear to conquer you. And with that, I'm going to ask you to jump in and tell us just a little bit about, not everything because people have to watch your YouTube, if you can tell us just a little bit about your experience.
Well, thank you for that very kind and heartfelt introduction. First of all, Zina, it's very wonderful to be with someone like yourself who is so authentic. And I think if people can remember that authentic connection with people is the key to success in whatever you do. And my Tedx talk, being the lifeguard of your own life, that was my intent, was to help people through the emotional part of disruption, because we all get disrupted one way or the other, whether it's a job loss, health issues, relationships ending. And if you aren't prepared for that potential happening, you can drown, to use the lifeguard analogy a little bit. And if you can realize that no one's going to come rescue you, as you said, in a hurricane, they send in helicopters for people who avoid the evacuation. So I think the more we empower ourselves to be our own lifeguard and not panic, that's the key lesson I learned from being a lifeguard, is when I saw someone drowning, I couldn't panic. I had to stay calm. And the same thing is true when we get unexpected waves that hit us.
Thank you. There is a quote. I love quotes, by the way. Every paper I ever wrote, I probably put a quote. I'm sure of that. So I'd like to read Maya Angelou, if you're okay with that. You may encounter many defeats, but you must not be defeated. In fact, it may be necessary to encounter the defeats so you know who you are, what you can rise from, and how you will come out of it. And your story was so revealing because the lesson for me is do not panic, stay calm. And when you stay calm, you're ready for any unexpected waves that may hit you in life. These are your words, by the way. I am just, again, so compelling. So may I ask you a few questions?
Sure. I just want to comment on why I love that quote so much. It's because you know who you are is the core issue here. Regardless of whether you're winning an award or being laid off or whatever is happening to you, even if it's, quote, looks like a defeat at the moment, we're not getting what we want. But we don't lose our identity just because we lose a relationship or a job. If people could walk away with that, I think we really would have given people a valuable insight today.
True. Thank you for that. So going back to, and again, I found the YouTube, the TED Talk so compelling. you have three philosophies, I believe, that you walked away from that experience, which 30 years later you still have. Could you share those philosophies with us and help us understand how you came with those ideas? How did you come up with those ideas?
Well, you're talking about the three things to do to be the lifeguard of your own life.
Yes.
The first one is don't bury your head in the sand like an ostrich.
Yeah.
And I just noticed that certain people think if I'm busy, then that's all I need to worry about, right? I don't have to pay attention to how things are changing outside in the world and trends, and you're burying your head in the sand. And what happens is in your career, particularly, if you ignore things, you can become like Blockbuster, which was huge at one time and now went out of business. Whereas Netflix pivoted from mailing movies to people to live streaming. So there's a classic example of a company growing and another one not. You can use Kodak. They were huge.
Yes.
And at one time, Apple was struggling and almost went out of business. It's hard to imagine now because they're the largest, company approaching $1 trillion in value or some crazy thing. So I think it's important for us to look at what's happening outside of ourselves so that we can stay current and not assume just because we're at the top, now we're going to stay at the top. That's the big takeaway for me. I have another example that I didn't give in the TEDx talk. I'll give your listeners insights. Remember when there were just three networks?
Yes.
ABC, CBS, and NBC? And then along comes HBO and Showtime.
Yep.
And they're like, oh, we're winning all the Emmys. And just when they think they're at top, along comes Amazon and Hulu. Now we're winning all the Emmys. Yeah. You can look at so many situations. Same thing in the car industry. It was just the three big Detroit car makers, and then along comes German car makers with Mercedes and whatever, and BMW, and then along comes the Japanese with Toyota, with less expensive and luxury cars. And then guess what? Kia, the Koreans come with Hyundai and Kia. So you can't ever assume you're going to stay where you are just because you're there. The second part is all about not just working smart. The old way was don't work hard, work smart. And that's not even enough anymore. You have to combine your intellect with your instinct and trust your gut. Because when you do that, then you're really connecting the heart and the head as to what I should be doing. And then the third part is get out of your comfort zone. Even if you're not being disrupted, the comfort zone just shrinks. It doesn't stay static. People think, well, I go to work the same way. This is my schedule. I don't like any change. But if you don't constantly stretch yourself, I tell people get out of the comfort zone and get into the learning zone. Because that's where growth happens. And that's what you need to do to stay as the lifeguard of your own life.
I am totally in agreement with you. The learning component for me is so important. Get into that learning zone, and no matter the anxiety you feel, and people do feel anxiety, go out there and do it. Just try. Just try. Don't be afraid.
Well, I say fear literally evaporates when you start learning something.
It does. It does. And go ahead. Sorry.
No, just if you remember learning anything new, whether it's riding a bike or driving a stick shift or whatever it might be, you're not great at it the first time. So I think the other big takeaway here is let go of needing to be perfect when you try something new.
Right. And bring it back to fear, because not only did you come up with three, I call them philosophies or ways of life or ways of being, but you captured three areas of fears that people deal with when they deal with disruption.
Yes.
You mentioned that again in your...
Sure. Well, when I went to, when I got out of my comfort zone and left Condé Nast to work for myself, I was helping people with their pitches to get funded. That's where I started.
Right.
And then people kept saying to me, hey, can you make introductions to investors after I have this great pitch from you? And I said, I don't know any. And someone said, oh, well, why don't you start a podcast? And then you could, interview investors and have that network. And I said, why don't I go to the moon? I don't know how to do that. So I said, what am I afraid of? And for me, Zina, I had to put faces on it because I was just too many things. So the first fear was the fear of rejection.
Yes.
And I'm like, well, what if I ask people to be on my podcast? And they're like, well, can I listen to some other episodes? I'm like, you'd be the first. So I've been in sales long enough to know that the key to handling rejection is to never reject yourself and not take it personally. Believe me, going back to this I was nervous the first time I interviewed somebody. I still had butterflies in my stomach, but the goal is to get them to fly in formation.
I love that.
Use the nervous energy for you.
Yep.
And then the second fear is the fear of failure.
Yes.
And one of my guests, Jay Sammet, wrote a great book called Disrupt You. And he said, failure is just feedback. Keep going until you get a zombie idea so great it won't die, which I just love that soundbite. And I looked at that and I said, what fear of failure is, what if I have a podcast and nobody listens to it? I'll be embarrassed. I'll waste time and money. But when you let go of needing everything to be perfect, and I can promise you that the first guest I had hosting is not as good as the one I've done, episode 181 for everyone. It's 181 weeks of doing it. But I let go of needing it to be perfect. And so I want to encourage people to think of themselves as progressionists and not perfectionists. And, if you're climbing Mount Everest, and you're halfway there, up, you have two choices. You can look up and go, oh, I've got so much further to go. Or you can look back and go, look how much progress I've made. I'm doing great. And then the third fear for me was the fear of the unknown. And literally that's what almost stopped me from doing it.
Yeah.
I don't know what mic to buy. I don't know how to edit. I don't even know how to host, and it was overwhelming. But luckily for me, I found someone that's their business, Done For You Podcasting, and they produce it. And all I get to do is the fun part, which is the interview. Yeah. And then they make the show notes. And so I think the solution there of the fear of the unknown is don't go it alone.
Right.
Collaborate.
Right. And listening to your podcast, your YouTube, that's exactly what I did. I'm not going it alone because I can do everything. No. Thank you for that. Thank you for that.
You're welcome.
As far as your YouTube, which is great, you also talk about storytelling, which is becoming very big now in coaching, in therapy, telling. I know, and I'll tell you a little bit. As a professor for 25 years at McGill University and Dawson College, I always share the story before even starting a class. That made them more comfortable, more at ease, and then I think they felt they could tell me things. So we broke down the barriers right away first. Now, why is storytelling so important to you?
Well, storytelling is literally in our DNA.
Yes.
You sit around the day of the campfires in the day of the cavemen, and now we sit around the globe PowerPoint presentations.
We do.
But it's the way our brain is wired. That's why it's so important to me. People buy emotionally and then back it up with logic. And when you tell a story, people relax.
Yes.
Say, oh, this is going to be entertaining maybe or interesting. And they let it into that, storytelling, imagination, what if brain. And if you can tug at people's heartstrings, you can get them to open their purse strings. So storytelling as a sales tool allows you to be memorable. It allows you to be connected, as you said, with your students when you tell a story. And the real secret sauce of storytelling is if people can see themselves in the story you're telling.
Yes.
Then you really got them.
Yes. Yes, I agree with that too. Sometimes storytelling can be distracting. And you talk about that as well. It could be distracting. You mentioned in your, let me just find the name. His last name is Yim. You talk about
Charles Michael Yim. Yes.
Yes.
I interviewed him on my podcast because he's the only person to get all the sharks on Shark Tank to invest in his company. He became irresistible.
Right.
And he did it because he had a very clear problem he was solving. In this case, he created a product that people would breathe into so they would not drive drunk, hopefully, at a party, because they would know from that breathalyzer. And so and then he went on to win Richard Branson's, tech challenge.
Yes.
So everything he does is through the problem solution lens. And so that's what makes his pitch so compelling. And so the investors are saying, I'm not only investing in something that's going to make money, but I'm going to save lives. And there's back full circle to the emotional tugging at the heartstrings. So you're going to have some social impact and make money. Then that's where the irresistible frenzy comes in the shark analogy.
Now back to your book. You wrote a very compelling book. I've gone through the book. And you talk in your book about going from invisible to investable. Mm-hmm. And how to help people. You help people learn how to do their pitch. I think we can all use some help with that,
Right.
Can you help us learn how to do that pitch?
Well, sure. Everybody needs a good elevator pitch. And few people have one. And, the problem is when someone says to you at a party or an elevator or whatever, what do you do for a living? Most people assume that's an invitation for a 10-minute monologue. And it's not. You want to say just enough to get people intrigued to say, oh, that's interesting. Tell me more. So in my case, I'll say, you know how everybody needs a good elevator pitch and few people have one? Well, I'm known as the pitch whisperer, and I help people go from invisible to irresistible when they tell their story. And when that happens, they get all kinds of referrals and new business.
That's great.
And I stop it there. And then usually people will say, well, I know what a horse whisperer is. What's a pitch whisperer?
Mm-hmm.
And then I'll say, well, much like a horse whisperer, I help people with their confidence, and I help people answer those 3 unspoken questions that everybody has when they hear you pitch.
Right.
And I stop. And what do you think happens when people hear that?
You throw it in their lap.
Yes, and I've created an open loop. What are those 3 questions?
Yes.
Tell me what those 3 questions are that everybody's thinking in their head when they're pitching. So should we close the loop for everybody watching the video and tell them what those 3 questions are?
Yes, please.
So when you're listening to anybody pitch you anything, whether it's get a job, a product, investment, whatever, the first question you have to yourself is, do I trust them?
Yeah.
Which is a gut thing.
Yep.
And in fact, the handshake came about to show you didn't have a weapon in your hand.
Yep.
Isn't that interesting? Then it goes from the gut to the heart. Do I like you? And that's where the empathy skills come in, as you spoke about earlier.
Yes.
And then it moves to the head, which is, will this work for me?
Yeah.
How could I see this happening? How do I see myself in the story? You're telling me somebody else's success story, but can it work for me? Most people think the opposite. Well, if they know me, then they'll like me, then they'll trust me. And you're doing it in the wrong order, in my opinion. You need to start from the bottom up, because people have to trust you, then they like you, then they know you. But most people just start talking about numbers and stuff, and people are like, I don't even know is it safe to be here? And do I even want to do business with you? So that's really the 3 unspoken questions. And I don't go into all of that, but that gives you an example of a good elevator pitch, right? Just enough to what's that? Right? Or someone could also say to me, well, how do I go from invisible to irresistible? Right? And then they've opened the door for me to talk a little bit about that.
Thank you, John. You're amazing. You are. I think each person in their life encounters many difficulties, many joys, but I think, like I said to you, growth comes from all of that,
Mm-hmm.
And you've shown us a compelling story. Like I said, I've said it several times already. When a little girl jumps into a pool, and I'm not going to tell the whole thing because people have to watch it. I'm pitching to people, watch it, right? You can trust me, right? We'll go through all that too. I believe that moment changed your life.
I think you're right. I think it's certainly, if something sticks in our memory, and that's what's so interesting about what do we remember in our life and what don't we remember? That's stories click in because we remember and anytime there's, heightened drama, right? This is life and death situations. And the first time you save someone's life is certainly memorable. And then you sort of step back and say, what are my life lessons here? Life is fragile. What made me be able to perform, right? I had all this training, and you hope and pray that it's going to work and show up when you need it. And you never know until you're called to use it. Yeah. So I think that, it definitely, it's compelled me to really want to be prepared. All those good things, lots of life lessons from that experience. You're very insightful to bring that up.
Thank you. It's my psychology background.
Mm-hmm.
Honestly, these are years that you spend learning about behaviors. You learn about trust. You learn about the gut instincts. You learn about the neural. That's where it comes from. Thank you.
I think, I would also say I learned to trust myself.
Yes.
That experience, right? I learned to trust that if I'm prepared and I've done the training, I am someone that you can count on in an emergency, which has made me a great friend, a great employee, a great son, a great brother, all that good stuff.
Well, I'm not going to say anything about the TED Talks, YouTube, but they have to go. But I believe that I just have to say that the girl is fine. The girl is fine. She was fine. And you made sure that she was fine. Thank you again, John.
Thank you, Zina.
I'll see you soon sometime.
I would like that.
Thank you. I'd love that. Thank you.